Testing.
Today is Monday, March 4th, 2024. We're at the Green Ladle and we'll call the meeting to order at 5:31 p.m. and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll do school committee member introductions, starting with Councilor Harriman.
Scott Harriman, City Council Representative to the School Committee.
Donna Gallant, Ward 7.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5.
Craig Charpentier, Ward 4.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Phoenix McLaughlin, Ward 1.
Megan Parks at large.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Kaya Poulin, Student Reps.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3 is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that members would like set aside? Member Gallant. Mike. Sorry, could you use your mic, please?
Not so much set aside as the policies as listed. Are they being retired? Are they being approved? I'm not sure what that means.
So if a policy is on the consent agenda, it has been reviewed by the policy subcommittee and there's been no changes from the previous policy, with the exception of maybe a he, she change to a they or their. So there is no changes. It's just a review. Substantive changes. Yes. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. Agenda item number 4 is public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now and on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personnel matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, and affiliation to Lewiston Public Schools. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, we will move on to a report from our student rep.
Good afternoon, y'all. This week is Spirit Week. So today was Dress as Your Favorite Character. And tomorrow is going to be Rhyme Without Reason. So basically you get a friend and you wear something that rhymes with what they're wearing. So let me think of an example. Oh, the intercom used Post Malone in a traffic cone. It's like I could dress as Post Malone and then Superintendent Langlis could dress as a traffic cone and that would fit the theme. And Friday is the spring dance. So yeah, all I got.
Thank you very much. That sounds like a fun week.
And I think Friday dance is DJ Fuller.
Oh, no.
Jason Fuller, athletic director, DJs a number of our school dances to save some funds. Just so go DJ Fuller.
Agenda item number 6 is to receive Lewiston Public Schools recognitions.
We have a couple of what I think are very special students tonight. But before they come up, I'd like to invite Principal Cindy Gish up because she, for the first time in a very long time, at least as far back as I can remember, conducted a spelling bee and got enrolled and signed up to do the county spelling bee and all those things. So Cindy, if you wouldn't mind coming up just to share a little bit about the development of and the implementation of and how we hope this will grow.
Oh, good evening. So it was actually requested from a student at the end of last year. There was a Disney movie out and now I'm going to blank on the name of it, but there was about a spelling bee. And he asked Mrs. Gish, can we have a spelling bee next year? And I was like, I'll look into that. I didn't realize how much there was to organizing a spelling bee. You have to join and pay the membership, and there's certain lists you have to study from. But we had about, I'd say about 60 to 70 third to sixth graders participate in it. We had some practice rounds, and then we had a third and fourth grade spelling bee and a 5-6 spelling bee. And then we combined them, and we could only send 2 students to the Androscoggin County Spelling Bee. These were our 2 students that we got to send. So I'll speak about them in just a minute. I even got to be a judge at the Androscoggin Spelling Bee. Like, this has become my life, the spelling bee, which was super fun. I mean, who knew? We were at the Poland Middle School. The library was packed. It was super exciting. Both of our students' families were there cheering them on. And it was just a lot of fun to participate in it. So I have here Fatima Kasim, who is a 6th grader, and Haley Tomasco, who's a 5th grader, who both did an awesome job. Haley is actually won the Androscoggin County Spelling Bee and will be moving on to the Maine State Spelling Bee at Bowdoin College on March 23rd. So it's super exciting for her. I want to share, though, the best story of the night there at the Androscoggin County Spelling Bee. That was like proud principal moment. They made it, Fatima made it pretty much to the round right before the last round. And as soon as Haley won it, the first thing Fatima did was just go right over to her and congratulate her and shake her hand. And I was just like, tears in my eyes, and went over. I'm like, I'm so proud of you girls. But it was just like, that's what we want to build in our students. Yes, the academics are great, but like that camaraderie and cheering each other on, it was so great to see. So we're super proud of these 2 girls here, and are excited for Haley to move on to the Maine State Spelling Bee. Oh, awesome. Thank you. We already have kids talking about it for next year, so we're excited to keep it going.
Did either of the girls want to share anything about their experience with us? You don't have to if you don't want.
When I first went to the when I came to the Androscoggin Spelling Bee, I was honestly really worried because I felt like in the first one, I just went off of lucky guesses. But then I won the Androscoggin one. I'm like, I don't think that was lucky guesses.
And now she's been spending a lot of time, Mom and Dad just said, studying a couple times a week.
Member Bowden.
Thank you. I just want to say it's just super impressive that you girls made it as far as you did, especially in the day and age where we all have cell phones and computers and spell check. So I'm super impressed by this. And I'm just curious, did winning the Androscoggin Spelling Bee come with a scholarship or like any sort of prize? And does the next one come with any sort of prizes? Like,
I don't think so. It's just kind of the recognition, but if you do win the Maine State Spelling Bee, you move on to the national one, which is held, I believe, in Baltimore. And the really cool thing too, that I forgot to say, there were 5 schools represented at the Androscoggin County Spelling Bee, only 2 of which were elementary schools and the other 3 were middle schools. So they really rocked it.
Fatima, did you want to share a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, I was also nervous too. But yes, I did practice as well. And so first it was at Geiger when we were doing our practice one, it was me versus a lot of other kids, mostly 4th graders. And in the end, it was me versus Haley, and we went on for a while.
You did.
Yeah, but eventually she won. Then that was good.
Do you remember what
Yeah.
word it was that got you out?
I At middle school, yeah, it was antonym.
And do you know how to spell it now?
Forever now?
Yes, I do.
She'll probably never forget. Well, the funny thing was when we started it at Geiger, I can't tell you how many adults were like, I remember which word I lost on. I remember which word I lost on. They all remember that. So I'm like, I'm gonna cause some trauma in some kids here, but it was super fun and we're hoping to get some other schools.
Any other questions? Member Galant?
I think that was my question. So it was only one school that participated?
Yes, it was. We had reached out to some other schools in Lewiston, but I think just the legwork that goes behind it, like they weren't ready to kind of jump on board yet this year. But we're hoping that some other schools participate and then we can have a district-wide one next year too.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just gonna say that was gonna be my question as well, maybe as a future agenda item is to look into doing this district-wide for our schools. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations to both of you. Agenda item number 7 is to receive and potentially vote on the Air Force JROTC field trip request to the Maine Maritime Academy.
And we have Lieutenant Colonel Mark Wellborn here to present.
There we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this field trip is held by Maine Maritime Academy. They sponsor a cadet leadership weekend challenge. And we have participated in this in quite a few years in the past. Pandemic interrupted that. And then they didn't hold it for a year or two. Last year they did hold it, but we had cadets going to Washington, D.C., so that interfered with that particular field trip. But we are hoping to renew it again this year. They have a lot of activities from the minute we get to Maine Maritime Academy on Friday afternoon until we leave on Sunday. The ROTC cadets they administer basically the challenge weekend under the supervision of the officers that run the ROTC program there at Maine Maritime Academy. There are quite a few different events. I'm happy to answer any questions. It is an overnight event, again, Friday night, Saturday night to Sunday. And the dates are, I believe, if I remember correctly, the 26th of April, which is the end of April break. So the students will be out of school that previous week, but we leave on Friday afternoon to go to Maine Maritime Academy.
It's just going to add some water related activity will be occurring. And just to repeat what you shared, this is something that Lewiston Public School students have attended for many years, but just not as of late because of shifts.
The water activities are in the pool at their field house. It consists typically, I don't know if they've changed it, but typically it consists of some survival training. They use they have a raft that would be an ocean going survival raft that the students are in. They have to be comfortable swimmers to participate in that particular activity, which means jumping in the pool, swimming to the other end, to the deep end, treading water for about 20 or 30 seconds, and then getting out. Those activities are well supervised by lifeguards and other instructors that are there from the other schools. This usually typically draws about 150 students, cadets from JROTC programs throughout New England. So typically that's about how many students they have.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. You guys are staying right on campus. I know there's not much lodging up there.
Yes, yes. In the past, and again, I said we've done this quite a few different years. We've either lodged in the field house, on the floor of the field house. Cadets all bring sleeping bags. The last few times that we were there, they did house all the students on the State of Maine, which is their 500-foot long training ship. I don't believe they're doing that this year because the State of Maine is going to be replaced in the near future, I believe. So I expect that we'll probably be housing in the field house itself.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve the field trip?
I'll make the motion to approve the field trip.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? It is unanimous. enjoy your trip.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate your support.
Thank you. Agenda item number 8 is to receive and potentially vote on the first robotics team to compete in district finals in West Springfield, Massachusetts. Do we want to hold off on this until somebody arrives?
So I don't see Kathy who's listed on here, but I know this is a time sensitive request because of when that competition is. This is the same competition they went to last year. I know that there's some answers in the packet, but they travel down with their team and they compete there, and depending on how many heats and whatnot, they score points. And if they do well enough, they may come back and hopefully report out, which they did last year, but also advance. And they'll revisit it at that point in time. I'm not sure why Kathy couldn't make it tonight, but she's usually pretty good about being here, so something may have popped up.
Member Bowden?
So I'm comfortable with going ahead with this, and approving it. I'm just curious about the cost and whether or not they're going to need, some money from us. Cause it says team is raising funds, but if it's time sensitive, like are they gonna ask for funds?
I don't believe they're asking for funds. I think the fundraisers they've done are part of their cost there, but also this has some backing from LRTC financial support. Some, not all. It's a costly adventure because the robotics equipment is expensive, but I don't believe they're coming to ask for funds for this particular competition. It would be if they were successful. I think last year they went to Houston after, so there may be a cost that comes back.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to approve?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to approve this robotics field trip to Massachusetts.
Okay, and
And I
second. Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? It is unanimous. Agenda item number 9 is to receive and potentially vote on the international field trip request to Iceland. Ireland. I almost said Ireland, Iceland.
So Bree is here to present, just as a reminder to the committee, the policy subcommittee continues to work on these trips because one of the questions that has come up, and I want to thank Bree publicly for joining that subcommittee conversation and trying to inform it to the best that she can. There's still this differing opinion of if it's happening in the summer and whether it happens to be a teacher or not, but it's not really a school affiliated event. Is this a school field trip? And so because we haven't shifted policy yet, this is before you. This is Bree's attempt to advance plans so she can recruit students who might want to go on the trip. But this is one of those trips that might not land before you in the future, but we're still debating that in policy. So just as a heads up to you that it may land at some point in time. It's not a school affiliated trip. But until that change, this is still an approval that is required should she continue to move forward.
So this is just the approval for her to start doing all the steps, really?
So this would be approving the trip.
Okay.
What we're finding with these trips is because there's so much lead and planning and securing how many students can go, which informs how the tour buses fill and all those pieces, which Kobe also shared recently with us. If we approve at this level, we're saying that the trip can happen because students and families start to get financially invested and amped up for it. So we don't want to do a prelim and then come back, which has been a confusing spot for us where sometimes these come before you for approval and they're already a year in the work of doing it. Kids and parents have invested financially. And then there's this conundrum of, well, what if we deny it? And then you feel stuck that you can't because there's already commitment. So we're trying to get ahead of it or the policy may change, but it hasn't just yet. Did I say that fair? Member Reeves?
Yes, I thought you presented that very well. Thank you.
Good evening, and again, thank you for letting me come before you this evening to present this field trip, quote, request before you to take students from Lewiston High School to Iceland in the summer of 2025. Prior to the start of the meeting, I did hand out 2 packets to each of you at your places. That is for you to read at your leisure. One of them is the educational impact report coming specifically from the tour company that I partner with, EF, which stands for Education First, with our student educational tours. And it gives you some statistics to browse through with the impact on student education as they have reported back to us in our surveys, as well as the parents' feedback, which is also very interesting to read how the parents feel about sending their children on these trips. The other packet that I handed out to you looks like this, the International Travel Program proposal. It's just more additional information than the proposal that you already have in front of you that I filled out as a field trip request form. Because as we were saying, the policy currently, it's weird, it's awkward. The form I have to fill out is very specific to school field trips and not these long extended international trips. So I wanted to be able to provide you some more information that I can't fill out on that Google form. So please take your time to look through that. When I stand here tonight, I am speaking for myself, but also there are several other teachers who want to have the opportunity to also eventually be in my position and take trips through EF. We have several teachers at the high school who are also interested. So I felt if I kind of gave you more information coming directly from the company, when someone else stands up also saying they partner with EF, then a lot of the questions are very similar that you can answer them in those packets, right? So again, we are planning to go over the summer of 2025, specifically in the month of July. I'm very excited to bring this opportunity to students at the high school because Iceland is not typically a country that many students may think of as their first choice to go to. A lot of people want to go to Paris or Madrid, and those places are wonderful, and those opportunities are available for them in other trips or in the future. But I'm super excited to travel to Iceland with students. For those of you, this is not my first time. For those of you that have been reelected recently, I stood before you earlier, or sorry, actually almost a year ago, asking request for a trip that we are going to do this summer to Ireland, England, and Scotland. And I have 11 going on that trip, and we're super excited and looking forward to going on that trip. So this was a second request. And I want to mention that when I do these trips, one thing that I look forward to is trying to collaborate with other local schools that also take students on these international trips. So this Iceland trip is also going to be shared in our planning with another local school, which will help us, as was mentioned before, that we try to fill buses and make sure that we keep the costs down for all of the participants. And so we are co-planning this with Levitt Area High School. They already were able to have their parent informational meeting and get students signed up. So they currently have 11 on their side of things. So I'm looking forward to being able to bring this to our students at Lewiston High School and hopefully get 11 or 15 or 20 to also fill the bus. And then it really helps the students to make connections prior to going with the other student travelers that they will be meeting because we're so close. Normally, a lot of companies will do that. They will combine schools together to fill a bus, so it keeps the cost down. But oftentimes, you get paired with a school in another state, and you don't know those people until you show up. And sometimes that can have really positive things, but can also have some negative things. So I like that we are going to partner right away with a local school so we can make sure that that teacher and I are on the same page about our rules and our policies when we travel abroad, and the kids can already start to meet. And we're doing that with our summer trip this summer as well. So the Lewiston students have already met the students up at Levitt Area High School, and they're making those connections before we even go to our trip this summer. So I'm looking forward to kind of continuing that partnership with them. And so anyway, does anyone have any other questions for me?
Member Bowden?
Thank you. So of the 11 kids that are going this summer, is it 11 students from Lewiston High School?
We
How
have
many?
a parent.
You have one parent that's going, and so it's 10 students?
Yep.
And one parent. And was there interest in this trip by more students and they just couldn't afford it? They just couldn't come up with the money?
It wasn't necessarily, that information wasn't necessarily replied back to me, but there are some that maybe weren't interested in that location and are waiting to kind of see where else we're going. So we're trying to keep it very open and broad to the different locations that we offer to students.
And then was there any fundraising efforts that were done for these 10 students that are going?
Yep, we did try to do a paint night. Unfortunately, our artist was sick on that evening, so we're trying to reschedule that.
And have you, I guess, so last week we heard from a teacher at the high school who actually leads the travel club at Lewiston High School that does this like exact thing
Yeah.
with students, and they fundraise, and it just seems more like more of an equal opportunity for students to be a part of it because of the fundraising piece of it. And so have you at all, since you came to us last, like looked into kind of collaborating with the travel club, so it's more of a school considered field trip than just like a field trip that like I could just book with my family because we want to go to Iceland. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't feel school affiliated to me. I'm having a hard time with that.
Okay.
So
I'm
I don't know. I
gonna,
just said a lot of things, but my question is this is not a part of the travel club, correct?
So this is not a part of the travel club. Bree has been upfront about her willingness to do fundraisers with her students. I don't know how much fundraising the travel club does. And so the travel club piece is a little separate, but yes, the questions you asked they're accurate in that this has a limited school specific affiliation, which is why we're looking at that policy. Bree has done some fundraising and has been at the table for what it's worth to talk about. I'll help fundraise. We can start this. She's been proactive about what could happen. But no, it's not connected to a travel club or anything like that. And we do worry about saturation points with if 8 teachers in our district decide they want to go on one of these trips and they're functioning as kind of independent contractors. Therein lies the question that we have as a policy subcommittee of, do we approve all? Do we get out of approving these because they're not school affiliated, but yet our students are going and they're advertising our schools? What's the threshold? Do we want to put constraints? Do we want to just stay out of it? It's got all these different layers to it. I don't know who's going to oversee the fundraising and the consistency of that effort or where the money will go if we have a whole bunch of people starting to do this, which feels like we're right on the fringe of.
Member McLaughlin?
Hi, yeah. Funnily enough, I actually did a tour through this company when I was in high school.
excellent.
And it was great.
Where did you go?
Greece. Yeah.
I just went there last year with the group. It was great.
life-changing. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess maybe on a similar theme, I was curious, do they require a school affiliation to go through this particular outfit?
Okay, so if your question is, do you have to be part of a school to partner with EF?
Right.
Not necessarily. You're certainly still taking high school students to do these student trips,
Right.
but they do have community members who will get like a community group if a school system is, for whatever their policies may be, say, no, we don't want to do international trips. They could run it as a community group. But that's not how we are here at Lewiston, so.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the trip I went on, not that that represents everything, it was all students, all through school affiliation.
Correct. Yeah,
My sense is that's usually how these things work for these
Yes.
types of travel companies, whether it's required or not. But yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
So I guess I have a clarifying question that if some organization or community, and I don't want to use names because I don't want to use names, but community group A wanted to work with kids and they had an interest in going on an international trip, could someone become EF certified, trained, what have you, and have it have nothing to do with school, but take school-aged kids on a trip like this and we would never know about it?
it is challenging to do. I only speak from an experience of another group that we were, again, partnered with from another state, and it was 2 retired teachers. So it wasn't like it's just, a Rotary Club or something like the Boy Scouts or something like that, right? That's trying to do like that. They would go under their own community title, and through their community organization, they would probably be getting students. Like, again, if it was like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, it would be their students, and they might be students from multiple different high schools. I don't see any other random community member saying, I want to do this. It takes a lot of work. There's a lot of planning. How would you advertise it? How would you get the students? So it would be some other like youth activity. This, like I said, this was like 2 retired teachers who had like a youth community outreach program that they had, and they went through that more than the specific public school system that they in their district, right? So I don't know if that kind of helps clarify it. It is hard to do. It's not just some strangers coming out and taking our kids out on trips.
No, fair enough. And I guess what I was trying to get to was, let's say this school committee decided in policy that we're not going to approve these, but we're not going to deny them. So we give the superintendent permission to review requests to put posters up in the school and to hold space for a meeting. And someone like you who happens to teach here
Correct.
could go ahead and do that independently. We would agree to let you use a classroom and have announcements put on and what have you. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a school sponsored trip, but the opportunity could still be available for those who wish to go through it.
Yes, right. And I think what the key point, what you said there is like still a LPS employee.
So if someone wasn't an employee, would EF say no, or is it just hard to do?
EF wouldn't necessarily say no, but again, I don't work for EF, so that would be a question for them. But I just think it would be a lot harder to do.
I think it's, we had this conversation obviously in the policy subcommittee, and I've been bouncing back and forth on it. It's hard for me to identify it as not a school event when it's a school staff taking our students. That's really hard for me to differentiate, but I can see both sides of it, I guess. It's difficult for me to be able to separate it from school when it's so tied to school.
And I would love to come back again and answer more questions at the subcommittee meeting as well, because there's so many layers and there's so much digging that you really have to do to answer that question exactly. Like, is it a school-sponsored event because it is LPS employees taking Lewiston High School students? Should it be separate? So that's definitely more conversation to have at subcommittee meetings too. Absolutely.
Member Heard.
Thank you. So I have a couple things. The travel club, do they, or does that teacher, there's no compensation or anything while he's taking these students? He has to take vacation time or PTO time if it's during school, like.
So that they haven't been traveling during school, so they haven't missed school, which I think is an important factor. And there's a stipend to be the travel club advisor, but not compensated while traveling.
Okay. So I think that, just like thinking about what you said, Member Parks, like how do you differentiate it between like school and like not school, but like the travel club, he's getting a stipend to take those students and have them experience trips like outside of here, you know what I mean? But you're not getting any sort of like stipend from LPS. So I feel like that's kind of where the line is kind of drawn there about whether it's school related or not. And maybe that's just me. And again, I guess, again, it falls under that for me. Like, I don't know if we should necessarily be approving these because I feel like we're kind of stepping out of our lane a little bit there, as it's not something that's happening during school time. It's not something that, you're not affiliated necessarily with LPS other than the fact that you work for LPS. I feel like, I love to travel and I like to plan. So I could contact EF and say like, hey, I want to take kids. And because I have Facebook and Instagram, I could throw it out there and say, who wants to go to Iceland? I feel like there's a way to get it out there enough. You know what I mean? I just feel it's just a weird line for me. Like there's some weird like gray area there. And it's not because I don't want the kids to go, because I think it's a great opportunity for them. I just don't know if it's our place to say like, yes or no. Like you said, there's no yes or no, but we're also not going to stop you from going if like that's what you want to do. You know what I mean? It's just a weird area for me. I just feel like weird about it. I don't know.
There hasn't, and just so you know, Bree, none of this conversation is about objecting to your efforts or the kids going. It's really about, is this our purview or not?
Right.
And if we could
I'm here
facilitate
because it's current policy.
Right.
And should policy change in the future, we will follow whatever ends up being the changed policy. But per current policy, we have to fill out the field trip request form, which is why I gave you additional documents, because it's not adequate to what I'm requesting. And the request would be then, stand before you, still continue just as, last week's approval and previous times I stood before you, right? Is that sort of just kind of continue with that policy until policy changes, and then we'll take next steps at that point. I would like to, if I may, speak a little bit in regards to the travel club, because I didn't really get a chance to go back and answer Member Bowden's question about reaching out to Colby Roy about that. And I have tried. And I would like to maybe consider that, because I hear that brought up quite a bit about being part of the travel club, and that seems to be the be all end all for these sorts of trips is through the travel club. But I would encourage you all to maybe reach out a little bit more and see what else does the travel club do for our students other than just these international trips. Because it's my understanding that it's just the international trips. And so when we talk about equity for the students to be able to have experience and broaden their world and make the world feel like a little bit smaller because they are learning about other cultures and other languages, the travel club is only open to those who attend and go on that trip. And as you know, that trip currently is 4 students. We talk about saturation. I have 11, 10 with the parent going this summer. So that's a total of like 15 students out of 1,600 students in the whole school. So I have a lot of ideas on how to be able to broaden students' horizons and world. And if I need to make a different club because I'm not being welcomed into the travel club at the school, I would be more than happy to start a different club with opportunities for students to be able to have pen pals with students around the world, be able to invite guest speakers to come in to teach the students about culture, make sambusa together, learn different languages, that sort of thing. If that is kind of what you guys would like to see more of, to be able to say that, while I do work here, but I'm not associated with a specific travel or exchange or global education type of club. I do have those ideas, and I have a proposal for a club, but I'm not going to put it out there yet until I kind of hear if that's what the committee would prefer, that I come being represented by a specific club, or, speak out more about how the travel club can be more inclusive.
Member Eames, did you?
Yeah. I did have my hand up. So we're probably going to change the process. We're probably going to change the form. So that's all
thank
good.
you.
I love the idea of a passport club or some other club that introduces people to.
Yeah, that way if they
cultural-
can't travel on
Yeah.
a trip, they
Yeah,
can
but
still have it.
get exposure.
Yes.
Yes, so I love that. So personally, it's not committee, personally encourage you to do that. And the other thing is the equity piece. If it is a school-sponsored something, it should have an equity component. So I echo what Member Bowden said and would encourage us to think hard about that. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve the field trip? Member Harriman,
I would make a motion to approve the field trip to Iceland.
thank you. Is there
I'll
a second?
it.
Seconded by Member Medina. Any further discussion? All in favor? 8 opposed to 1. The request is passed 8-1.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And real quick, when we come back from our trip this summer, we'll be sure to report out at your earliest convenience.
That would be
Thank
wonderful.
you so
Thank you.
much.
Agenda item number 10 is to receive and potentially vote on the LPS Administrators Association contracts for 24-25.
So each year in early March, by contract, we have to review the administrators' contracts. There's a list shared with you that says who's being issued a 3-year contract, who's in their probationary years, any no reelective action. Those things were all on the list, and they are subject to your approval. So this sheet is essentially my recommendation. This is pretty standard, something that we do each year, early March. I believe by contract, it's around March 1st that we do this. The association's well aware of the piece of information here and my recommendation to you.
Any questions or comments? None? Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the Administrators Association contracts for 24-25? Member Bowden,
I'll make the motion to approve the Lewiston Public Schools administrators contracts for 24-25.
is there a second?
I'll second.
In unison. That was literally exactly. Ashley, okay, it was seconded by Ashley. Any further discussion? All in favor? It is unanimous. Agenda item number 11 is to review and potentially vote on the first read for policies EBCE and JJIBC.
So EBCE is the school closing and cancellations policy, and I believe it was at one of our last meetings. They all run together. We talked about changing the language in the policy. So to give Superintendent Langless the ability to do an early dismissal, in particular after the school day has started. So the recommendation is to eliminate the language around significant advance notice from this policy. Everything else in the policy would remain the same as it is in the policy manual now.
So with that language, really, this is the shift that essentially has been approved to at least bring to the school committee subcommittee, the policy subcommittee, to allow us to do early release. So if we are having a bad snowstorm, prior to this language shift, we would have to have given them notice the day before, or have such an emergency on our hands, like the day we dismissed in December, when we had that really bad wind and rainstorm and flooding and whatnot. We did an early dismissal that day, but it was underneath the policy language of essentially an emergency. Snowstorms aren't always considered an emergency, but sometimes they're dangerous enough to send folks home. And prior to, if this is approved, we would have to send notice the night before that it's possible, and then have the series of steps after. So this is a shift in practice.
Any questions? Member Gallant?
I'm sorry, but I've got an ear plugged up, so I can't really hear. Did we discuss this earlier that included our concerns about the littles not having somebody home?
Yeah, we did have conversation around that, and that's why that policy existed in that language that it did before. But what the decision was by the school committee prior to today was sending this to the policy subcommittee to work on the language to allow it to happen again. And so is this the first read on this? First read, it requires 2 readings.
Any other questions? Member McLaughlin?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's worth doing. My question was just more, I guess, procedurally, is there value in making it explicit in the policy that this is allowing early release? Because I'll admit, I reviewed it and I didn't grasp that that is what this is referring to, because it's just removing a line, and I understand how that is the implication, but is there a purpose for doing it that way?
Yeah, so in the first paragraph, it talks about all of the options that Superintendent Langless has in terms of canceling and closing school, and it has included dismiss school early in the event of severe weather hazards, travel, in emergency. So in the previous version, we had included, for the reason of the concerns that had been brought up, we included the language about significant advance notice, which limited his ability to specifically call an early dismissal, because the other items, the school cancellation or closure for the day, or the delay of the school opening, was an easier one to do because students weren't already at school. So the early dismissal was where he found, and we found, that it was difficult to do the early dismissal if you were looking to give the advance notice. I'll say, sort of, in reality, even with a late start or a delay of school, or cancel of school, it's only sometimes a couple of hours before school starts. But at least students were not in the building. So the early dismissal was always in the policy, but the advance notice was where we were having the barrier to to do that, because sometimes it was, kids were there, and then we needed to communicate that out.
I guess just a follow-up that does make me think of then is there, maybe this is asking too much, but is there a target advance notice you would shoot for an early dismissal, or do you not really want to put a number on it?
If anybody wants to do the conference call at 2 a.m. No, I think the challenge is trying to make the right decision with a sense of resiliency to main conditions, but also not putting people in a bad situation. So there's no real target. I am curious though, would this read more fluid if there was an edit that says the superintendent has the authority to boom, 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 in lieu of that? It's almost like that whole second paragraph is confusing in a sense, because what Karen was referring to was the first one, because it says those things, but it doesn't list them. I guess that's the question I'm asking from an edit perspective. Would it be better as a list instead of commas, or do people have big feelings? And the sufficiently in advance, the last school committee voted to approve night before as that target window to communicate. So with Maine weather, it's hard to communicate the night before, hey, you might have an early release tomorrow.
Right.
And get any kind of buy-in from people for the day. So the other thing too is this is a bit of a target on my back, in that there have been times when schools have early released or use an early release in our immediate area for snowstorms. And we don't, and people think I'm just this mean, awful, terrible person. And what reality happened is, with this language, I did not have the authority to dismiss early unless we cross over into those, what I would consider to be that severe emergency type stuff.
Any other member heard?
Thank you. I think it's fine, honestly, and maybe like as new members, you just don't know, like Jake as well as maybe some of our other members, but we kind of give Jake a lot of like blind trust there because we know that he's gonna like, he has kids, he has to drive just as far as the next person, and so like he doesn't make rash decisions. I think if you would ask Karen and Sue and Bill, they're constantly like in his office, so what are you gonna decide yet? And he keeps it very like, he has to really think about it. So I'm fine with it. I obviously like trust Karen's like, he thinks about it a lot.
We've had staff try to bribe my children to tell me when they get home. It's from school.
So yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it. I think, like I've always been comfortable with Jake's decision making. He's not rash. He's not quick to like make a decision. So I'm fine with it, really.
The early release will be the toughest of decisions from my wheelhouse, because I know we're sending kids home to a door that could be locked, to conditions that could be slippery, colder, more windy, all those factors. So I don't think that approval of this just means Jake's going to just start rampantly using it. I think part of what you're asking, like from my target, this is maybe the hardest decision to make. This is really one of those, it's done something that we didn't anticipate. It turned into a squall and it's not going to end. So sooner is better than later, those kinds of metrics. So this is the trickiest of them all, but until we have this policy changed, it's not even a tool I could use.
And hopefully like the Sun Journal coverage of this will put it in the newspaper so that we don't get to the day where you have to do the early release and people are like, we didn't know this was a thing. Hopefully it makes its way out there. Member Eames?
Yeah, I continue to be, I trust you, but I don't trust every single cog in this wheel. So I still worry about the one little who ends up without being able to get home. So I want to register my discomfort with this decision, although I am, obviously, if we vote for it, that's it. But I just want to register that I'm very concerned about one kid in a snowbank, as you said one other time.
And this is just the first reading we're voting on tonight. There will be a second reading. Any other questions or comments? Member Gallant?
I concur with Member Eames as far as the concern of littles. I mean, if we're talking junior high and high school, they have the resources, but the littles are very disconcerting.
Member Bowden, is your hand up? Yes, okay.
Sorry. My question is actually on the next policy. Are you gonna talk about that first, or can I ask?
So I think Karen's going to talk about it, but she just mentioned something that I think is important, that when we drop off our littles, if we have an early release, we put staff on the buses. We make sure that they can kind of get in. So if there's no one there, things like that, we bring them back to the school and then we make contingency plans. So it's not foolproof, and I'm not naive, but I just don't want people thinking that a bus is going to pull up somewhere and just let kids out in a blizzard and drive away. There's another step in between. And we do talk to kids, like, are your parents home? And we encourage parents to call the school if they hear anything about an early release. And we have backup plans at our schools for people to stay and stay behind, not put that kid on the bus if it is a different scenario, or have a family member pick them up. There's lots of ways in which we can get kids to a safe place. But I echo your concerns, and it's the reason why this was not in policy, was because of people's concerns around that one off chance you're talking extreme situations when you might do this. There's an inherent risk there. Schools do it across Maine every year, and it seems to play out, but I'm not going to lie that those are the days I hold my breath. I want to make sure everybody's gotten home safe. We're not missing anyone. No parents are calling saying, where's my student? That's a long day. And we want to make sure we get through the evening and everybody's home safe.
Do you have anything to add to this discussion? No? Okay. Member Medina?
I guess one of the concerns I had, like, let's say it is like a last minute cancellation and you said parents can call the school. Well, I've called the school when there's like a emergency situation going on and, they can't answer all the calls. So I would just like encourage parents, maybe to download like Teams and be able to reach out to teachers directly so they can communicate like, hey, I can't get them right now, or hey, like this person's gonna pick, my kid up, and they can show ID, all that stuff. But that's just something that came across my mind. So
Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the first reading? Oh, did you, are we gonna vote on both together or separately? Do we want to vote on both together or separately? Separately? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the school cancellation policy first reading? Member Hurd?
I would like to make a motion to approve the school cancellation policy.
Thank you. Seconded by Member Bowden. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is 7-2. It passes. And then JJIBC.
So this policy has not been updated since 2006 when it was adopted. So I made the updates based on and brought it to the policy subcommittee based on the recommendation from Maine School Management on the update of this policy. There was no issue that brought this policy forward. There were no real concerns in terms of the previous policy, but the additions and the deletions were based on what Maine School Management recommended for updates to this policy.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. So as a booster president myself at Lewiston High School, the new language under M and N are kind of concerning to me because they're very contradictory to the common practice that I've been used to. So I just wanted to ask for some clarification on M, as far as the boosters puts on a banquet at the end of the season for teams. And my experience has been, if there is like a award handed out to a student, the coach will come to me and say, I want to do this award for this student. And so I'll have the award made up. And I never knew I would have to come to the school committee. It kind of seems like a conflict where I'm on the school committee. Would I have to come here and ask permission, like, oh, we're going to hand out a Blue Devil award to this student at the banquet? Is that something that this is saying? Or is this more, because it says a public announcement, is the banquet considered a public announcement? Or is that considered sort of a private thing because it's the sports banquet? Can you answer that?
So can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Is the team giving the award or is the booster club giving the award?
Well, it's the coach giving the award, but the booster club pays for it and makes it.
Yeah, so I know it's semantics, but it's that, so you're purchasing the award for the coach to then give to the team. So the way I read this policy and my understanding of it would be, no, you wouldn't have, the booster club is just paying for the award, not giving the award.
Okay.
In theory, it's coming from the coach. It's not you standing up there saying, Karen, the booster club is giving this award. It's the students getting the award from the Lewiston basketball team.
Okay. And so then my next question on N, the boosters have directly paid for officials and assistant coaches for the last 4 years that I participated in the boosters. The officials specifically in the summertime, for summer ball, we pay, I think it's like $50 an official. That comes out of booster money, as well as additional assistance, because I don't think that assistant pay is in the budget. And so it was coming out of booster pay to make sure that we had that. And I believe that happens in soccer. And I know that happens in soccer as well. And they also pay for like a goalie coach out of booster funds. And so is this saying that we no longer can pay for those assistant coaches, therefore we won't have them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think summer ball may feel different because it's not MPA and school specific, school field, but not school. I know there's crossover there. But I have seen when I have seen boosters purchase equipment or even jerseys. I have seen coaches receive stipends by way of the boosters. I think some level of oversight should be there, but I'm with you with your question of some of these practices do happen. Yeah.
Even when I've gone to our athletic director in the past about new uniforms for the team, it was the answer that I got. He ended up paying for the new uniforms, but the answer was, well, I can pay for some of them, but boosters is going to have to pay for some of them as well. And that's equipment, right? Their uniforms, you can consider that. And the boosters absolutely has paid for warm-ups and paid for sweatshirts. And it just, I just don't know what we're allowed to do now and what we're not allowed to do. This language just seems a little murky as far as, can we still pay the officials in the summertime? Can we still pay for the assistant coaches? Can we still purchase warm-ups and other things for our student athletes?
No, I think these are really good questions, and from an oversight perspective, I think the intent of it is, we may need edits here for starters, but also the intent of this from a booster perspective and a school perspective is we function as separate entities. Boosters can do things that schools cannot. Schools have to do things that boosters don't have to comply with. And so there's a lot of things going there, and there's money involved. So we want nothing to do with it from a school oversight perspective as it relates to that. But this does cross over in ways that I know boosters have supported coaches and paid for equipment, and especially not during the regular season, but have paid for officials in off-season things related to the team. So it might be one we have to look at.
Do we need to work on the language more before the
So we
second
can
reading?
Bring it back to the committee.
Yeah, I just want to kind of make it clear though that, the reason the boosters pays for these things is not to step on the school's toes or interfere. We pay for it because it is not in the school budget, and it is budget season, and you're going to see why this stuff is not in the school budget. So I just think it's important, when you have parents that are willing to be a part of these organizations and raise money to make sure, and it's not just athletics either. I feel like there's other things in the high school. It's just a way to help supplement the funding that we're missing to make our students successful in whatever they're doing as an extracurricular. So I'd like to see the language changed. I don't know what or if can be changed here, but it makes me uncomfortable to pass this because I know this stuff is happening directly.
Member Heard?
Thank you. So it's not just Booster at the high school either. I'm the PTO president for at McMahon, and so we don't buy jerseys or equipment or pay coaches and that kind of thing. But Kay kind of talks about group gifts, which I would consider. I mean, that's what the PTO does at the beginning of the year. We kind of meet with all the other parents and the principal and say, like, you know, what's our plan this year? What do you guys need? So a couple of things that we talked about was maybe like a greenhouse to enhance their what they're doing over there for STEM, and some like bigger or like different games for the quote unquote big kid playground. So whether it's like cornhole or ladder ball or something like that, because the 5th and 6th grader kids, they don't really play on the playground equipment. So like, what else can we get for them that they can use on the playground? So I agree. I think there needs some like language here, or something needs to be looked at, and maybe, you know, like Janet or I or anybody else can like come to that conversation and say, like, this is what we do, this is what we've done in the past, and how does that affect the language? We've even looked at like sensory paths to put in the schools, you know, for some like OTPT, like that kind of stuff. So I agree. I think it needs to be looked at, and I'm not comfortable approving it the way it is because I think it's a little restrictive.
So I'd be curious if the committee took no action on this tonight and shared your suggestions, if you have suggestions for language with Member Eames, who's chair of the policy subcommittee, because I do see these stand out more now that we're talking about them. So if that's okay.
Yep. So we will just hold off on voting on that. Any further discussion? Or are we just good to move on?
Just one more thing, just for the notes with regard to I actually would like to see that happen more often, just to keep these different booster groups honest. You know, I'm a booster president, and I flat out refuse to be the treasurer because I want nothing to do with being responsible for keeping track of the money and the receipts and all of that in case there was an issue. But you know, like I have someone that's fantastic that is my treasurer, and it just seems like we have, which is great, complete freedom to spend on whatever we want and raise whatever we want. But we're never held accountable. And I feel like it's very, very important, especially in this day and age, that, you know, boosters are held accountable. And I think that as a committee, we should be annually checking financial records. Even if it's a finance committee thing, we should be requesting the boosters' financial records in every booster organization in our school district.
I agree. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item number 12, to review and potentially vote on the deletion of the following policies listed on the agenda as A through G.
Okay, so as I shared with the policy subcommittee at our last meeting, with these, most of these being forms, there are a couple, there may be 2, I think, that are actual policies. So A, B, C, D, and G are all forms that aren't necessarily going away. They just don't need to be in the policy manual. They need to be made available to those that need to access them. And for new members, we've had several of these that were included in the policy manual, and we're not deleting them, and meaning we're not using them, we're just taking them. We're recommending the deletion from the policy manual. Letter F, which is JLCCA, and then JLC. Those are both policies. One that is mandated by law, so we don't need to have it in our policy manual. Those are screenings that have to happen. And then the JLCCA, students with HIV/AIDS, that was a policy that was written and adopted several years ago when HIV and AIDS was a big concern, and those items are actually captured in another policy now, so we don't need a separate policy for those items. So those are the reasons for the recommendations.
Member Bowden.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the deletion of the policies listed under A through G in our agenda.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? It is unanimous. And somebody is requesting a quick bathroom break before we go into the budget. Is everybody okay with that? All right. Okay, we will briefly recess. School committee will continue with agenda item number 13 to receive the budget presentation overview.
All right, so tonight we start kind of that next level of the budget process, and we'll talk about the things noted here on this slide, but you also have your binder. So at some point, we'll do a tour of the binder, talk about some different components of the binder, and then it will actually be Wednesday that we start diving into articles. We'll have some folks come to support their work through the administrative team, and we will go from there. So the first thing I want to share is you see the note here on the slide. It says Munis system note. For those of you who are new to the group, we did a pretty significant upgrade to cloud computing with the city as it relates to our budgeting software. But as such, there's some vastly improved components of that and redundancy fixes that we infrequently have Munis go down, which last year happened on a frequent basis, and it would stop our business office or what have you. So we're happy about that, but it does spit out different reports. So we're learning that feature. I liked some of the reports that came out, but I'm also curious about your feedback. Also, in years past, we've started with a budget memo. We did not start with the budget memo this year because what happens is I spend a lot of time writing that with detail that we immediately change. And so our team met, we talked about it, and the thinking was to still have a budget memo, but create that closer to when we meet with the city, when we've done some lifting as a group. And if you're okay with that, we'll proceed that way. And if you want a memo, I'll bring one Wednesday. But we are going to go through things in pretty good detail. So today, just want to talk about an overall, from a preview and overview perspective, a little timeline history, and then talk about revenue, which is money that comes in to the district and the way in which it comes in, whereas the budget's really about expenditures. So today we're going to talk a bit about the revenue process, which we've talked about numerous times. Again, this budget and these numbers that you're going to start seeing tonight, these are what we believe is needed, but we're also knowing that we will not bring these numbers through to voters at the referendum. So this is our starting point. I think this budget has already had things reduced from it, but also will have additional things reduced through this process. The work we have before us is to identify reductions while trying to do the best we can with limited resources. So we remain committed to the students and their experience, while knowing that there's no money on the tree outside. And we've been working to identify potential reductions while we consider feasibility, realities of the labor market, impacts of local taxes, and providing what we can for our kids. One example of that, and I hope this is no shock to to Director Crafts about special education, but things like speech pathologists. We can't find enough of them to fill the open spots we have now. So part of the request is to have more of those, but we can't fill them. So my approach to that is we'll likely recommend that we reduce those requests. And then if we're able to find speech pathologists in the future, I would bring that back to the committee and ask to expend funds to do that. But to put them in a budget when we don't have applicants is to me, it's that delicate balance of, yes, we need it, but it's hiring that is not likely a reality. So let's not include it in the moment. There's some things we can't do that. We can't go beyond a threshold of like services we provide, but to say, we have one, we need 4. I'm not putting 3 in the budget, but in the draft you have before you, it has all of them. So those are things that we can pluck out more easily based on just rational thinking. We do need them, but the rational thinking behind it is we're not going to find them. And so we'll address that if they show up. If there's an influx of graduates in speech pathology or people who want to work in this area, we'll bring it back to you. So factors, for those of you who've done this with me before, our budget is predominantly staff. And because of that, when you have a factor, it comes up in almost every article. And I'll be a bit repetitive. We can give you breakdowns, but these are key factors that pop up when we talk about cost drivers throughout the budget. Contractual obligations and healthcare adjustments. So every year in contracts, people get steps, they get increases in their wages or salary. And we also have fluctuating and changing healthcare costs, which are based on a projection. We get a cap in March, and then we'll know usually in April what the actual is from our insurance increase. This is from our provider that says your contribution to healthcare is going to be this based on the percentage increase. So we put targets in there. We budgeted 15% in that specific area this year. If it comes in lower than that, it's an automatic reduction. If it comes in higher than that, we have an automatic increase, but we have to provide that benefit. Other factors is we are working to weave the cost to keep more kids local while having to pay out of district cost. So the students that we send to special purpose private schools elsewhere, it's incredibly costly from tuition. And also I put in here the seed costs associated with them. And that's money that we have to pay as part of our contribution to the main care seed fund. And so when we send kids elsewhere, we pay that. So we pay the seed, we pay the tuition, we pay the transportation, and that's a very expensive thing. The problem is you can't just snap your fingers, have all the staff here to provide those levels of care. You don't have the space to provide that level of care. And so when we talk about weave, it's like building our capacity without breaking the bank to also be able to provide more locally so that we don't pay those out of district costs that are really, really expensive. But it's a weave. It really is. So we try to figure out how much can we bite off. Sorry. How much can we bite off before we spend more in one area or the other?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. When we did this last year, we set aside that money specifically because we didn't know what was going on with the special purpose private school funds. Is that going to just roll over, or is that now absorbed into the budget?
So that money sits in a reserve. And so it's separate of this general fund conversation altogether. But I'm anticipating this year that we may have to use that just to pay our bills when tuition start as they come to the end of the year invoicing. So I'm not certain we'll need to, but we may need to tap that. If we do, because the way it's set up as a reserve, it needs approval here by you and also by city council. And that's set up just constraints, so that money doesn't get used for other things. Other things you see here are mandates, including the tuition rate increases, which you just mentioned. The FMLA pool contribution. So there's laws working right now about building a pool, and there's a percentage fee for that. So the percentage fee for us this year, if we take on the full 1% for the 6 months of next year, it's $382,000. So 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start doing the math on the state's projected formula, that's what it costs us. In the following year, that 1% will be for 12 months. So you're talking $764,000. That's a big number, right? Wage levels, there's still conversations at the state level to mandate minimum wage. Some of that overruns some of our collective bargaining agreements. And so if that happens or occurs, that just might be an adjustment we have to look at, depending on when it takes place. Some of these conversations have language within the law that they approve it, but there's like a delayed action of when it occurs, which will allow us to budget in the future for that.
It's not minimum wage. It's an increment above minimum wage, like when I forget how much, but it's like more than minimum wage.
Yeah, it is. It's more than minimum wage. So it's 150% of minimum wage and 125% of minimum wage respectively. My fact checkers out back might tell me differently, but it's based on the minimum wage, and it's if you provide educational services like an ed tech would be 150%. If you provide other services to schools, it would be 125%. I believe is the proposed language in legislation. We also have subline increases. So with all of these factors, including ESER, which I referred to last time and actually had someone ask me a question about it. When I say ESER, this is just COVID relief dollars. So that money has sunset or sunsetting. One of the things we did with those lines was create more capacity for substitutes for all of our schools. So because that's sunsetting, we're looking to increase our sublines. We have found that to be beneficial that we've done subs the last couple of years, and we'd like to continue to do that. We're also looking at a shift in FMLA language and vacancies and things of that nature. So that's that's where you'll see the subline increases. And then debt service, Adam will do a better job explaining the debt service, but it's really about the timing of what things are coming off our books because the state has been paying for them, which creates a revenue versus the things that are locally funded that don't have state subsidies. So it looks like our bill for debt service went up when really it's our liability has gone down. But it's an increase in our budget, at least from an expenditure perspective. So binder review. So we'll just do a walkthrough together if that's okay with the group. So in front of you in the binder, you have a number of tabs, obviously. And if you go right to tab 2, you can see the school committee budget timeline. Sometimes we have to shift this depending on someone's availability, what have you. But for the most part, we try to stick to these articles at these times. And we're intentional about these, and we invite others to come speak to these different items. So you can see a rough schedule. Some big dates for us that we want to be thinking about. March 18th, which is a week from next Monday. But we're just 2 weeks out. We actually have a joint budget workshop with the city council. That meeting is usually fairly light. We do an overview. We'll answer any questions that folks have. And sometimes we get a sense of where city council feels like they're at as it relates to the budget, but not always. And then fast forward, we have meetings if needed. And then the city council presentation is April 9th, followed by their vote on April 30th. Sometimes after the April 9th vote, we have work to do. Sometimes they're okay with it. We'll see how it plays out. And then we have the referendum, which happens in quick time.
This really is not that important of a question, but I'm asking it. The joint meeting, does that involve dinner again? And I only ask, well, because I want dinner, but because last time we had a joint meeting and the dinner was involved, there were no cameras. And I got some feedback about not even knowing that meeting happened and they were upset that they didn't hear what we had to say.
That was a retreat, not a meeting.
Yeah, well, I know, but still it wasn't well known to people, I guess, that was happening. And so I just want to clarify, is the joint meeting a dinner meeting?
Nope. So the joint meetings are for budget are public section. Actually, last time we did it was in here. We just kind of extended this row down. So we had it right here. But yeah, the retreats are, you get a little food and we have a different kind of conversation, but yeah, the budget meetings will be televised and those are meetings. If you want to bring snacks, you're welcome to.
And retreats generally have never been like a public event. It's always just been for school committee and city council to like get to know each other, like a relationship building thing. But historically, in my time on the school committee, it's never been like a public event.
But it's still a public meeting. It's still
It's
considered
not
a
a
public
meeting.
meeting.
People
Well,
can come if they want, but it's a retreat, not a meeting. So doesn't fall under the meeting category. So we don't have the public requirement, the public notice requirement.
okay. All right.
Tab 3, this is what we talked about last time. We went through the state funding formula, otherwise known as EPS or ED 279 is the form it comes out in. So that's the printout of that. And I believe they got you the entire width of the printout, so you can see all of the data. I think the long paper was enrollments was the charts that I looked at in the past. Excuse me, but I also sent that to you in email. So if you want to look at that PDF in color, I encourage you to look at it in color. It's a little more easy to read. Tab 4 is descriptors of what each article is. We'll do this as we walk through, but I also put them up on the slides if anybody wants to look at those. But there are 11 articles in the general fund budget. These are dictated by the state. What budget codes exist within which articles are all part of the state accounting structure. And so you'll see sometimes we'll say things like this is a correction or this is a movement because of funding. We articulate those and feel free to ask any questions you have, but that will pop up when we see things go from one article to the other. I'm finding that it's less and less frequent with Adam helping us with the finances. He's got a really good foundation of that. And he's teaching Bill everything he can. So but these are important pieces. So when we talk about the cost of, say, special education, that's gonna be Article 2 directly. So special ed is just Article 2. CTE is Article 3. So when Rob comes to talk about LRTC and programming and increased subsidy and increased cost, that's gonna be Article 3. So these are things that we live every day as far as where things belong. But again, happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. There are descriptors in that tab 4. I don't want to read them all to you. Sometimes the title explains itself until you get to say, sometimes people get crossed up in what are in 4, 5, and 6. But those descriptors can be helpful. And again, we go article by article as part of our presentation cycle, and that's what's in that schedule that we shared in tab, I don't know if it's 2 or 3. So that's the articles. Questions on those? Good. Okay. So in tab 5, we have our revenue sheet. So if everyone could please turn and look at tab 5, it's the one you have the big yellow band in or the column in. And I'm going to take some time to talk about what this sheet is and why it's so important to our budget process. When you get further in the budget and you see all the lines with all the numbers, those are expenditures. That's what it costs for that thing. So the other side to that, to have a balanced budget, is to have a revenue sheet. And so this breaks down the areas of our revenue. So what money comes to Lewiston Public Schools? How does it come here so that we can pay for the things that we expend on? So if you could look just at the sheet from, say, 1,000 feet, or without getting into the detail of the numbers, it's built in columns. And so you can see year by year, you can see the different budget cycles and requests. And then moving to the right by columns, you can see last year's approved budget, which I want to make a note. Recently, when you approved positions, because there was new subsidy to support the hardship for multilingual enrollments, that number is not included on this sheet. We made a conscious choice to leave it off because that approved, in our minds, represents the approved budget from last school year. The problem with that is you might see what looks like a big increase in your revenue sheet, but really it's reflective of the changes from the hardship funds. We did talk about changing it. We even talked about it at finance, but changing it, I think, would be a confusing misrepresentation of what was approved by voters last year. So just as a little caveat, just know that there were additional funds sent to Lewis Public Schools this year to support the multilingual effort. And we have those captured, but they're not on this particular sheet. So you can see the year-to-year variances, which the second column to the right shows you the variance. Anything in parentheses and red is a negative variance. Anything in the black is a positive. To the right of that, you'll see percentages, and that reflects year to year from that particular line what the percentage change is. So when we look at the very top left of this, it says general fund. So all the work that you do in this next chunk of time is really about general fund decisions. And the reason I say it that way is there are other funding models like title funds, grants, things like that. So while I allude to things like ESSER or the federal COVID relief fund dollars that are sunsetting, those positions that we had hired over the years with those funds, they're not in the general fund. They work here, they're our employees, but they're not in this general fund because we're able to pay for them by way of grants. So sometimes people have questions about different positions, and again, happy to answer them and talk about where they might be paid out of. And sometimes they're in the general fund, sometimes they are not. And some things can move between them and some of them can't by rule. Question?
So grants and subsidies are not considered revenue.
So subsidy definitely is, but grants are considered revenue, but they're not on the general fund revenue sheet. So when we build our budget for our general fund, this ties down to what school committee approves, what the city council approves, and then voters approve. But let's say we got a grant tomorrow for a STEM lab and it paid for a teacher. That position won't be in this the revenue won't be in this part and the expenditure won't be later in this binder because money's coming in by way of the grant and it's going out through the separate grant process. It's not part of the general fund. A tab for grants, not as part of this for the general fund. Yeah, the grants,
Almost
that's
every
the
meeting we
monthly
get the- yeah.
financials are part of the consent agenda. All that grant information is there.
But we don't have any.
We don't have anything for the year that shows us what we've got in for the year.
So, yeah, we do have that. So when you get your monthlies, it's part of the monthly financial statements with the year to date. So that's where that's included.
Okay.
It's known and available. It's just not part of the general fund budget process. So looking at the top left, you can see general fund, and it says state EPS model, which we've talked about. So working our way down the list, the big number is subsidy, and then you have the CTE component. Again, that's LRTC. And then you see 3 lines of debt service. Those are state funded projects. And so when you take those direct subsidies and those subtractions from the debt service, again, that's about timing and how much is left. You can see that the total state subsidy for Lewiston Public Schools is over $72 million. So of our budget and all of our asks as it relates to the general fund, over 72 million is paid for by way of state subsidy. The next section down, you can see what's called local. So if you look on the left-hand side, about 2 inches down, you see the word local. And you see the minimum local, which is state language. It's a formula for what the state says you must raise as a minimum. You have local only debt service. So for us, this would be things like the high school expansion that was approved by voter referendum. That project was built, but then we have a mortgage. And so that's what that number is. You also see additional local. So without changes, which we know there will be, you can see how much would be asked to be raised locally of 16.9 million. And that's obviously an increase. Last year it was 7.2 million that was raised locally. And that's when I talk about the work we need to do, that's the number that we're really following is the overall impact here locally. I'm not blind to subsidy and that we pay taxes to the state to get that subsidy, but when we talk about the voters in Lewiston who will have control over yay or nay on this vote and the city council that will weigh in, that is that number that we will be continuing to work to chip away at. Then you have other, and so there's various ways there that revenue is generated, like the main care billing that we've talked about in the past, and there's gate receipts for different games and things of that nature. So that's where you get into those miscellaneous or other items. And then I want to pause because the next section is adult education. Adult education by state law is required to go through this same process, but it is not part of the general fund. So it functions separately, but it requires the same exact process as the general fund. So we include it here. Adult education has to have your approval. It has to have city council approval. It has to have voter approval. When you go to a referendum, if you look at the postings that are near it, you'll see a whole list of items that are being approved. And so in Lewiston, we have yes, no, and then sometimes we do the too much or too little as far as just for feedback. But what you're voting on are the articles in adult education, and that's all listed out. Last year, we added the $1 million reserve for the unknowns of special purpose private school, which are still kind of an unknown. We know more information, but we don't have a total yet. So each one of those is its own article and item on the vote. So if you walked in, you'd see Article 1 with a total, Article 2 with a total, etc., working your way down. So if people are looking for more information on what they're voting on, that's what it is by article and adult education. You can see adult education. We reduced the amount of fund balance they're using this year. Adult Ed's done a pretty good job of staying healthy with grants and other revenues. So their budget is up a little, but they're doing a lot of good work. And that number, at least for me, was not hard to support at that level, given the work that they're doing. Sure.
Back up one section to the other section.
Yeah.
What is gate receipts?
So it's, what's zero change, but that is, when you see zero, that's a variance. So we anticipate about $40,000 in gate receipts, and that's from, people attending games, essentially. So when you pay to get into a home game, not a tournament game, not an MPA tournament game, but Katie Krantz, who's actually sitting here, helps with a lot of home games. Actually, I think all of them, unless she's physically not able to be there. But when you pay to go in and they collect your money and they sign their initials on your hand or whatever, those funds are all kept and double counted and submitted. And so over time, those are the gate receipts that are underneath other. Not all events qualify in that way, depending on the MPA rules. So when we host like tournament games, MPA gets the gate. Our boosters usually do well, but MPA gets the gate.
Since you brought up boosters, I just want to share a story about this. For the girls' basketball playoff game against Edward Little 2 weeks ago, the boosters did pay the admission of every single high school student that wanted to attend. And we cut a big check to Jason Fuller yesterday, actually, for that. But it got more students there. And just another thing that boosters does. And it's good to know where that money goes, because I thought it went to the MPA. So I'm glad to hear it goes back to our budget.
Yeah, no, and there was a whole lot of students that went to that game. And to build that following when the crowd is big, it's just so much more fun for the student body and for the athletes. All right, let's see here. Jumping down to the bottom, you get into your grand totals. And so the grand total, again, revenue, this is the funds that would be required to fulfill our full request for expenditures. And so this is how that revenue sheet is built. And you can see the grand total, if you will, of $115,866,000, which is up again in this initial proposed over 13%. And as we've already talked about in our prior meeting, when we talked about the state funding subsidy formula, this is when we start getting into this is the work that we have to do. Me and the team are already looking at some reductions. Some of them are, again, what I'll speak for myself, what I think are common sense based on feasibility and the reality of the labor force. Some other reductions we can make because of results we're seeing or not seeing. Being mindful of the wants and the requests of administrators who are informed by their team of that. I do want to note that this includes a $5 million use of fund balance. So that is money that we have currently in our coffers that is unspent. That number is too high. I do not want to spend more. I will push back hard against that, but I don't get a vote at the end. We, over time, actually want to reduce that number. And what that number is us using unspent funds from prior years to start our budget. And it's dangerous in that as we have more and more lean budgets, the less and less fund balance we'll have. So if you get to a point where you have a fund balance of, say, $3 million total, and you need 5 to start your budget, you have a $2 million problem instantly. And so we want to responsibly get to a place where we're using less than $5 million at some point in time somehow. This is not an unheard of number. We've used it multiple years. Even some of it predates me, but the goal would be to get it downward so that it's sustainable.
So I was wondering if you could go back to the local section and explain more to the new folks on the committee why in 2021 and 21-22 we were under $1 million in our local additional funds as opposed to 7 million last year that we asked for.
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a number of factors there. And so looking at that, if everyone could go to the 2020-21 column and look at the minimum local according to the state's formula, and it says 18,531 $1,790. So that was the state's equation for the minimum local share. Still raised locally. So in that particular year, there was still $20 million raised using local tax dollars. The state established 18 as being the minimum. So the additional, plus you had some debt service, but the additional was 214,000 above and beyond that local minimum share. If you follow it to the right, you see that 18 drops to 16. That's directly state discretion on their formula. So that's the state saying, well, last year we said local need to raise 18.5, and this year it's only going to be 16.8. And then it went from 16 to 17. And you can see that it's actually stayed around the $17 million number. So in the state's formula, that's what they're saying you need to raise locally. The problem with that is this year's number is about $1 million less than the 2020 number. I want to say it again, that this year's number for what the state says is the local minimum is about $1 million less than what was approved in 2020-21. So this is that funding formula stuff. But you can see that if you look at the total local, two big factors here, the change in the local minimum required, but also the debt service. So if you look at debt service that was approved in 21-22, that's 2,365,000 plus. Again, remember that's revenue. So that's money coming into Lewiston to help pay off debts that were incurred for a state funded project. But when it comes in as revenue, it's money coming in. So that, again, you look at that total from 20. So in a few years' time, we use ESSER funds to try to help with some things. And you can see the jump from last year to 2021 of $6.5 million. But when we go look at, say, staff, and I say, and I'm estimating here, 70% of our budget is staff. So when everybody gets their step and their health and fringe and all of those benefits increases, doing nothing, we spend at least $3 million. That's in a light year. I would actually say in years that the steps are included in a 3, 4, 5, 6% increase, if that's how different contracts play out, that could be a $5 million number. And that's doing nothing at all. And so when you go from 21 to 23, 24, and I'm using that because that was an approved number, that $6 million plus difference is a massive shrinking of a growing by percentage factor. So every year people get their step and their raise, insurance costs go up, inflation goes up. So the budget continuously does this. Even if we do nothing, it keeps going up in these increments. So when you look at that factor, we've only changed by about, okay, it's been less than $7 million from 2020. That's a serious shortage, if you will. If you just did the math on it, we should have, not that we should have, from a budgetary perspective, with 70% of your budget being staff, that's a $3+ million growth per year in a conservative budget. So if you do math, it's 3, 6, 9%. This year would be 12%. And we're under that.
Just to clarify, our district hasn't shrunken down since 2019, 2020, 2021, has it?
When I say shrink, I mean from a financial perspective, we have shrunk because between the inflation factors and the salary scales, we've not grown at the pace in which those have grown.
But I mean, like students wise, like we have not shrunk. So I don't understand why 2019 through 21, they had the minimum local up over 18 million and they just continue to shrink it down on us when all we're doing is growing financially and like as people, like we're growing, right?
Yeah, we're growing. Their needs are more complex and better defined. Our enrollments are very healthy. We have, as a district, not shrunk from that context of enrollment and level of need. So yeah, my reference to shrinking was really, if you look at the incremental growth of steps and salary and benefits, and you pair that to what we've done for growth in our budget, it's not been adequate. But I'm also mindful it may not be adequate. It is expensive to many homeowners when we look at their contribution, so we have to be very mindful of it.
Augusta needs to do better.
Can I ask for clarification? I know I've been through this a couple of times, but I actually am not exactly sure what minimum local share is. That's a formula that the state sends us that if we don't meet this, we won't get our subsidy. If we do meet this, we will get our subsidy. Is that what it is, or is it something else?
It is exactly that. If you go to tab 3, that's the ED 279 we looked at last time. And you go to page, I'm gonna say 4, but bear with me. The last page, but not the back of it. To the bottom right, you can see. Yeah, it might be page 5. Yeah, I went from the end. Oh, sorry, yes. Oh, these printouts, maybe they were big, Megan. So at the very bottom there, you can see there's a calculation that they create. And you can see the 17,739 there. So that calculation, that is what represents the local minimum to share. It's the state's way of saying, if you don't raise at least this, we won't give you all of the subsidy we've identified. So the narrative over time has been, it's about $1.75 or $2 per dollar you don't raise. So if you don't raise at least that, you're actually out $3. So you lose 1 local and then about 2 from the state. So if we don't hit that local minimum. Yeah.
I just have like a general question on that, and maybe you don't even know, maybe you don't know the answer to this, but does the state take into factors like the community of the school that's in? So like more, we're talking about like Wells and like Yarmouth and Falmouth, is their local contribution higher?
So yes, do I feel like there could be more support from the subsidy perspective for a community like ours? I do. Having said that, there is less support in wealthier communities. And some communities are what they call minimum receivers, and they get almost nothing from the state to run their schools, or very little at all. So yes, there's a metric in here to give more percentage points, if you will, in the multiplier. That was the word I was trying to think of the other day, the multiplier. There's more, sorry, but
It's a delay.
it's been a week or days. But the multiplier is higher for things like level of service, poverty factors, the multilingual piece. Those are all multipliers so that we end up with more subsidy here in Lewiston than other communities do. We said this out loud, I'm not certain, but I think we may be the highest receiver of state subsidy as it relates to public schools. But again, if you look at our state subsidy at what did I say, 72 million. If 70% of our budget, which is over $100 million, is staff, the state subsidy doesn't cover our people, never mind supplies, or the other factors that are beyond the 72 million. Other questions around revenue? Again, this is money coming in, but the cautious factor is this has to match our expenditures. So whatever we reduce in our expenditures, we go back to that line on the revenue sheet, which is the additional local. So right now that says 16.9 in the yellow. Every reduction we make reduces that number. Yeah.
If we take in more revenue, does our subsidy go down?
So no, if we had, let's say we had another school project that had revenue tied to it, it wouldn't impact our state subsidy in this way. If we have other revenues outside of the general fund, they usually have rules connected to them, like the STEM example I gave. So if you get a grant for a STEM, within the grant, it will say you can buy this much of supplies, you have to employ a teacher, you have to deliver the curriculum to X amount of kids. Like usually that's what I would consider to be other revenue in that sense. But it's usually have pretty tight parameters around how you can spend it. Or when you get into like title, those are state approved expenditures. So you can't spend it in certain ways until the state approves it.
So I'm saying, like, let's just say in a perfect world, we acquire a very large building that we can have other services in there. So like a daycare and maybe some OT, PT, like, and we have revenue coming in that way. That doesn't affect our subsidy at all of what they're going to give us.
No, it wouldn't negatively impact our subsidy, although there are things we can do like those kinds of ideas if we found good partners to create revenue that might reduce our cost. One of the biggest ones, and this is why I say weave, that special purpose private school. So if we had enough staff and some space, we would send less kids out to these special purpose schools. And instead of spending $150,000 per kid to educate them, we might be able to do it internally for 35. So for every kid, we could be saving $110,000. That's just me talking. We'd have to actually put the information to paper, but we don't have the space, we don't have the capacity, and we don't have great bandwidth to afford both. So that's our challenge right now. But yes, more revenue would be beneficial to that burden, that tax burden number, but the state wouldn't penalize us for generating revenue through services or what have you.
So I actually have a question for Scott. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Counselor Harriman. I'm just wondering if you can give the school committee maybe an overall feel for where the city council is at this year on, have you guys talked about like a mill rate that you'd like to stay at? Have you talked about, our budget at all and what you're projecting for us or what you see for us? Is there a number you want us to stay under?
Honestly, we haven't talked about that yet in our budget process. We will be starting the city budget in the next week or so. But at this point, we haven't really gotten to that as far as a goal for the school or a mill rate or anything.
So just to add to that, I have been in conversation with the city administrator, and we still are working these numbers daily, but we have to share them with the city so that they can do the calculations for things like the mill rate. So their budget process is a little, it's scheduled differently than ours in that this number becomes known, we continue to do the work we do, but they take these numbers to create things like the mill calculation and whatnot. We have a rough idea here at the bottom. But it's not inclusive of what the city component is. I also want to add that, so in the last 12 months, as property has been sold and the valuation was more accurate to today's market, it creates different tax revenue for the city. And so what that number is, I'm not certain, but that factors in as well. So you have the valuation, which helps with EPS and that calculation. You have a revenue share component, which comes from the state to the city, which will play into it. You have fund balance from the city perspective, but you also have increased tax revenue because of assessments changing, again, through transactions. So we don't have that number in our hand, but there is a quantifiable thing out there that says the city has received X amount of more dollars in tax revenue through the last 12 months than either anticipated or than was budgeted. So that number could also offset some of this burden. So think of it as if the city had $5 million more in tax revenue this year, they could spend all 5. They could throw a little like to the penny as a tax reduction. So there's some possibilities there that might reduce what this feels like for a burden. This number is still too big, but it could reduce what feels like the burden from a penny perspective.
I guess just since you mentioned valuation, when I'm looking at this, it seems like what's really killing us is that there really is very little to no valuation growth. I mean, it looks like going back to fiscal year 2022, the city valuation grew by, what is that, maybe 5%, while the total revenue, including the full projection or full recommendation here, grew by over 20%. And that's a hard thing to deal with. I mean, there's not much you can do if the salaries are going up, insurance is going up, you can't make that stop just because our city valuation isn't going up. And I don't mean that in in the sense of what the revaluation would fix is the rates being more sensible, but the actual fundamental value and the money generated from that will not change, and that doesn't seem resolved. And that is kind of a long-term worry. I mean, we're not going to fix that in the next couple of weeks, but you know, if there's a way to fix that in the next 5 years, that would be delightful for us.
So I'll piggyback on that too and say if we can come up with a way to fund schools separately of local property tax, which is the most broken approach I can imagine.
Yeah.
The idea that wealthier communities are minimum receivers but can have everything they choose. And schools or areas that have more poverty, they might get more state subsidy, but it doesn't come close to meeting the needs of kids. Never mind just having whatever they want. It just feels like different funding models might be more beneficial, but that's a whole different layer of conversation and paradigm shift. But funding based on property taxes, to your exact point, when you look at those valuations, even in a healthy community, if it's not growing at the rate at which contract negotiations grow, you'll forever be behind.
Question back to the out of house special education. Is it a possibility that it could be like, even though you can't do the whole thing at once, could it be like a 5% of bringing kids back, doing it in increments rather than having to go the whole 9 yards the first year?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. That's our hope is to do it in increments and use the spaces we do have with the staff that we do have. But again, that's additional staff. And so it gets expensive in a hurry. But yes, incrementally would be the goal. And then eventually if this goes well, incrementally we get to a point we don't have enough space. We're not far away from that. There's only one school right now that could probably take on some, and that's McMahon. And that population could change based on need at other schools that are saying we're too full for more kids.
I mean, other than us here, I mean, has this proposal, can it go other places? Can it go to the city council for their support and approval? I mean, we hear of the possible savings, but I mean, who else knows about that? I mean, who are,
Yeah, so I say it everywhere I go. And we've been talking about this for a long time. We put a dent in some things with the main care billing. We have saved some money. It's hard to actualize it because the kids are alive and well and moving and the enrollments shift and change, but we have gotten better, but still the amount of money we're spending, we could be looking at a between 10 and $15 million cost to send kids to outplace schools next fiscal year. Other questions? So I've already reviewed all these numbers, the revenue, short of other questions, that was kind of the big thing for tonight. Again, I just want to emphasize and reiterate for anyone out there listening or watching that this is that starting point that includes things that we think that we need, but we're also doing this work from the reality of I don't believe we can go ask taxpayers for that level of support. And so that's part of the work that we do. We've already started that. And I know that last year we heard some thoughts or some feedback from the general public that, well, you started with an artificially high number. I can guarantee you this is not artificially high. I can tell you that we've cut millions of dollars worth of things or refused them as proposals from people before we even built this book. So this number could have easily been much higher, but I also know that we cannot, I have no will or want to move this budget into the next phases as is. There will have to be reductions. And the reductions I think will be significant. So next up, we meet Wednesday. We will have some administrators join us. I'm going to talk about Articles 1, 4, 5, 7, and 11. if you want to do some homework and look at some things, feel free. And then we'll be absolutely in full budget season.
We'll be at Connors on Wednesday, not here, right?
Yes, we'll be at Connors Elementary. The space is not available. Right across.
Yes, that way, that direction. The main
Yep.
entrance, yep.
So we'll go in the main entrance, which is essentially straight across this parking lot, and we'll go to the right. We'll be in the cafeteria.
Sometimes the gate is closed if you come in through the high school entrance, so you're gonna want to come in through the top of Bartlett Street, through the Connors entrance. Across from Androscoggin Avenue. It's not always closed, but if it is closed, then you have to go all the way around. All right. Agenda item 14 is a report from the school committee chair. I have a couple things to report. School board day, main school board day at the State House is next Monday. And all school committee members are welcomed to attend, meet at 9 o'clock in the morning at the State House, and there's presentation and acknowledgement at the State House for school board members from across the state. So if anyone wants to attend that, you're invited. Former school committee member and city councilor Linda Scott is one of multiple women being acknowledged this Sunday at 11 a.m. at the Hilton Garden Inn for the Women of Achievement Awards. Linda's getting one of those awards, and one of our teachers, Abby Rocher, I always pronounce it wrong, is also getting one of the Women of Achievement Awards, and Shanna from the Chamber of Commerce is getting one as well. But the two ties to Lewiston Public Schools, I thought that we should mention that. So tickets are available still through the YWCA website. So if anyone wants to attend that award ceremony, it's this Sunday at 11 a.m. And that's all that I have. Agenda item 15 is a report from the superintendent.
Budget. We're obviously doing work there. Some other things to share. I did mention that there was a second adjustment to the multilingual funds. We don't intend to use those and add positions at this time. I want to see how the current additions play out, but there was some additional subsidy announced last week connected to that. We also are engaged with, thanks to the work of Jenny Derrigan and some others, looking into supports for our students that are in need. And there's an organization called Souls for Souls, and it's souls like SOLES, as in shoes, for souls like SOULS. And they provide initially 500 pairs of shoes to support youth. And this cost us nothing. We have to commit to getting some feedback from the kids about the shoes and their experience. And that nonprofit just supports our kids. That's a big one. Another item that is important to bring up, which we've made calls, we've translated, we've interpreted, we've sent letters multiple times. We are at a place now with the immunizations that we can no longer enroll students. So those messages are going to families. But if you are hearing from constituents that they have to get their documentation in and or get their kids immunized and then get their documentation in, or they will not be able to attend. There are some caveats, like you get 90 days if you're new to our area. There's a handful of other things, medical exemptions, but all that information has been shared all over the place. So just make sure you know if you're getting those calls, please have people reach out to their school nurse. They have the most updated information and list and the needs that have not yet been met. These immunizations are known and approved by law. These are not COVID related things. These are measles, mumps, rubella, that kind of stuff. So there's a whole list of them. They're out there. I actually got a call from the school nurse this fall that one of my kids was missing one, and it was really documentation. And so it's just a matter of the mistakes can happen. Sometimes it's done, but if they don't have the documentation, we actually I made the state say it in writing, unenroll students of all ages in all of our schools who have not yet met their immunizations. This has been a big effort since last spring for those of you who are new to the committee. We started, I think it was April, sending letters and followed up again this summer. As soon as school started back up with follow-ups again, I think in September, October. So we're just there. We can't hold the line any longer.
Just a clarifying question on that. The way that you said it at first was that we can no longer enroll students. are you unenrolling students right now?
Yes, so we are on that fringe of students will be unenrolled and told that they have to go home and cannot stay in school if they are not fully immunized with records, unless they meet some other exception, which again, school nurses can work with families on.
Agenda item number 16 is a report from our city council rep.
Not a whole lot to report. City council starts the city budget process next week with workshops on Tuesday and Thursday. Our next business meeting will be Tuesday, the 19th. There would normally be one tomorrow, but because of the primary election, we are not having a meeting tomorrow. So go out and vote in the primary.
Thank you. Update from subcommittees. Member Bowden?
I don't believe negotiations has met since our last school committee meeting, but we did finally have a finance committee meeting right before this and basically went over everything that Jake just went over for the budget.
Okay. Any other subcommittees meet?
The policy committee met and you saw the results today. And then our next meeting's in a couple weeks, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. School committee community announcements. Member McLaughlin just pointed out to me that I said the school board day at the State House is Monday. It's actually Tuesday. I don't know why I said Monday, but it's Tuesday. Thank you. Member Bowden.
I just wanted to point out that I feel like this might have been one of Jake's announcements that he missed, but I got an email today for a survey for my students. And so I just wanted to point that out to parents in the district. If you're listening, check your email and try to take this survey for your kids because it only gives us information on how to better our school district.
Does it show that it comes from Lewiston Public Schools? Because I know in the past it's come from another agency.
Yeah, before it used to be like an odd name, but this
Yeah.
one actually says Lewiston Public School Survey. So it was clear to me what it was as soon as I saw it.
That's good. That's helpful. And Member Hurd.
Thank you. So McMahon is doing their 5K Tiger Run. I've shared that a little bit before, but registration is now open online. If you want to sign up, we have had a lot of students register. Your student should have gone home with an orange sheet of paper for them to register because we're doing a fun run after. So I can send the information over to Jake and then maybe he can share on the Facebook page for everybody. But that's going to be April 27th and that's at 8 a.m.
Thank you. Any other community announcements? Okay, future agenda items. Member Bowden.
Sorry, I feel like I raised my hand for everything tonight. I just want to make sure it got written down. I'd really love to see the whole district participate in the spelling bee that we heard Geiger participate in.
My word is cupboard. That's I got knocked out of a spelling bee in 4th grade for misspelling cupboard because I thought it was BB, and I will never forget that it's not cupboard. That was it stuck with me for life. I'm traumatized. Member Eames.
I was talking with some community members recently and there's some still concern about the bathrooms. And I was wondering if there was a way, I think it was last year, I missed the field trip to the bathrooms that we organized for ourselves. Maybe we can do that again. Maybe I won't miss it this time.
Pointing to Bill, I think he could help coordinate that. That's not a problem. I should also note that we did request funds for bathrooms in the LCIP process. And is that for next year, Bill? Or is that, there's 1 year out? Yeah.
Okay,
So it's
but
been requested, but
yeah.
not approved or anything.
But I mean, I think getting us into the school anyway would be good. And then with that as the target, I think it would make some sense. Anyway, that's my future agenda item.
Member Bowden.
I just wanted to bring up again, my request for information on midterms and how they went, this year and the consistency of them and if there's a policy or should there be a policy. I just feel like it's a discussion we should be having, before finals happen, because they all fall along the same line. So I wanted to bring that up again because I still haven't heard anything. Thank you.
Any other future agenda items? Agenda item number 20 is to enter into executive session to consider a real estate matter in accordance with 1 MRSA 4056C. Is there a motion? Moved by member Bowden.
Seconded.
Seconded by member Hurd. All in favor? School committee will go into executive session at 7:42 PM.